Welcome to the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast
with our mom,
Misty Bailey. Tips and encouragement
for
real-life homeschooling
is headed your way.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. I am Misty, blogger at Joy in the Journey and podcaster here at Joyfully Homeschooling, where our goal is to help you have a more joyful homeschool. Today is episode 10, and it is another Fess Up Friday interview. And I am talking with my friend Shawna from Not the Former Things. And what we're talking about today is, of course, our joys and struggles with homeschooling, but also Shawna is what I personally would call a special needs expert. I think she's an untapped resource in the homeschool community, and her goal with her blog is to encourage homeschool moms who are homeschooling children with special needs. So today we talk about so many different things related to special needs homeschooling, and I truly believe that she is going to be a huge encouragement to you as she shares the struggles and fears she had about homeschooling and just how she's been able to overcome those and what she has learned about homeschooling children with special needs along the way. Even if you do not have a child with special needs, I still think you will get a lot out of this episode because we really just talk about loving the child that you have and the child that God gave you, whether or not they have quirks or issues or things that make homeschooling a little bit more difficult. So without further ado, here is my interview with Shawna. Hello, everybody. It is Misty from Joyfully Homeschooling, and today's Fess Up Friday interview is with my friend Shawna. Hello, Shawna. How are you?
Hello, Misty. I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to chat with you. We've been friends online for a while, but this is our first time actually chatting, almost in person.
Hey, it counts. I'm excited.
It totally counts. So, okay, can you tell everybody a little bit about you, your homeschooling story, your blog? Give everybody everything they need to know about Shawna in Cliff Notes.
You bet. So my name is Shawna Wingert. I blog at Not the Former Things about homeschooling my two children, both of which are delightful and just amazing, and also have some pretty significant special needs. And so our homeschooling journey has been kind of all over the place the last 8 years. Like I said, I have two sons. My oldest is 15 and my youngest is 12. I'm happily married to my husband, Mick, and he's a voice actor. He does voices for all the cartoons. I like to say all the cartoons that we're trying to get our kids not to watch. Those are the ones that he's on. And we live in Southern California. So we started homeschooling, like I said, 8 years ago, because my oldest was having some pretty significant social and sensory issues in school. He was just coming to the end of his second grade year in public school, and it was interesting because he was doing very well. He was, in the 99th percentile on every single standardized test possible, which I didn't even care about at that point. Did very well in all of his subjects, but literally struggled every single day getting into the school environment. He could hear other kids' pencils scratching on the paper, the bells, the smells. To this day, if he smells bleach, it reminds him of the school cafeteria in a very negative way. So there was just a lot of other. He was starting to get bullied even at that age. There were a couple of times where I was at the school and in the classroom and just saw some things that made me sad and very uncomfortable for him. So interestingly enough, God had been preparing my heart for that decision for quite some time. I never thought I would be a homeschooler ever. I actually went to school to be a special education teacher. So, I had some experience. I had no idea that I would end up in the position that I am in, but embraced the school system, thought that it would be absolutely the best choice for my children, until it wasn't. What's interesting is that just really fast, I want to say, we made the decision to homeschool before we knew any of our boys' diagnoses. So this was
Oh,
a
wow.
decision. Yeah, we could tell there were some differences, particularly with my oldest, but we, they were still young enough to where it wasn't obvious yet what exactly was going on. And so the decision was made just based purely on the fact that it was not a great fit. But it was a difficult decision because I was so biased going into it as someone who had been in the system.
Oh, yeah. And, that is a common story that I have actually found, like from the moms I've talked to so far, is that a lot of us came from those education backgrounds. And then we left the system, and it takes some getting used to. It takes some almost deschooling for yourself to become a homeschool mom because you're so into that system. But it's actually surprised me how many so far have come from the public school system into homeschooling. Like, it's kind of crazy, really.
It really is. I think it took a lot longer for me to deschool than it did my children, honestly. I even had, this is so crazy, I just told you all the sensory issues that my son had in the school environment, but I even had a bell that I rang when it was time to start school. I had it in the middle of our table and I would ring it. It sounds so silly now, 8 years later, but at the time, we do what we know. And so, part of the way that we transitioned in was me trying to just recreate school as much as possible, including a little bell to ring. So
that's so funny. I had a teaching stick. Like, I had my little teaching stick.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I carried over from when I taught in preschool, and I carried it over into my daycare. I did home daycare before homeschooling, and I totally had my little teaching stick with my pointer, and we did the pledge every morning, and I pointed at the calendars, and I whacked that teaching stick. Okay, guys, it's time for school. Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing.
Looking back on it, I'm like, what were we doing? That's the whole point, is not to have to do it just like school. But it took me a while to get there. That's for sure.
It's a fun journey, I think, though.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are going to dive into these questions, talking about your homeschooling joys. So the first one is, what is one struggle or fear you have had regarding homeschooling?
So here's the thing. I mentioned that both of my boys do have some special needs diagnoses, but I think that this is true for almost any mom that embarks on this journey and that is in this journey for any length of time. My greatest fear, and what I battle the most in terms of my own mindset, is that I'm missing something, that I'm not doing enough, and that somehow I'm not meeting their needs. And this grand experiment that we have going on here is going to fail miserably, and that my children are going to be the ones that suffer because of it. So yeah, it's a constant battle to try and overcome that idea that somehow, even though I believe and have seen the progress and understand that this is what we're called to do for our family, the constant struggle is not sort of giving into that fear that we're just messing them all up.
Oh yeah. So are you talking about gaps, education gaps? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think, okay, so let me give a little bit of background. So with my children, both of them have diagnoses that create social differences, and my youngest also has some pretty significant learning delays. And so it's both, actually. I think that, I worry that my youngest may never read completely proficiently, no matter how long and how much we've spent practicing all about reading level 1 and 2, that we're still going, and that he may not get there, and that's a reflection of me, right? That somehow I missed something and didn't teach him the way that he needed to be taught. And then there are social differences, and so the question that everybody has when you start homeschooling is, what about socialization? How are they going to be socialized? And when you have children that struggle socially, and, we're in doctor's offices and therapist office all the time, the concern for, the quote professionals that are not as familiar with homeschooling or as comfortable with homeschooling is always, how can you take a child that has a gap in terms of socialization and pull them out of what they perceive as being the environment where a child learns to be social, which is school. And, there's a million pushbacks to that. I could go on and on. The reason why we homeschool is actually because I feel like my children are getting a much better approach to how they interact with the world and how they learn about their differences and how to self-advocate for those and that kind of thing that would never happen in a school setting. So I think it's the same concerns that any mom would have. It's just, it's taken, let me say this, we have a little bit more in terms of the gaps that put it in my face a little more often. You know what I mean? I see the differences and I see the gaps a little more often, and that definitely is my fear.
Oh yeah, and I totally get that. My two of mine have ADHD, which I know. I mean, I talk about my youngest more than I talk about my oldest. But when she was in public preschool, they said like one of her evaluations was that she was behind socially. And she's always been like a little bit more immature. And we had her diagnosed with ADHD for me, because she was so socially awkward that like I felt people thought it was because she was homeschooling, because she was homeschooling. And it is. I mean, we had her diagnosed when she was around eight, I think. And she struggles more with like the impulsiveness, and she knows this, like these are things we've talked about, but I don't bring it up a lot on the blog. But it is that social awkwardness. And that's really her biggest struggle with the ADHD is the impulsiveness and some distractiveness. But, so like, I always had that, like, in the back of my head, that it's because she's homeschooled. So, she's behind. And then you bring in my youngest, and we've had, so much struggles, like you said, with the reading. And that's like a constant fear in the back of my mind, like that he's never going to fully get it. And I get everything that you're talking about, like totally get the fears. So since I have those fears too, and you have them, so tell me, how can I overcome them? Or
well,
or are we still going to be working on this a year from now or 6 years from now?
Well, here's what I will say. I think the truth is it's in God's hands. If I'm going to get, big picture, how do we overcome these fears? For me, it's been the constant reminder that God gave me these children just as they are for a reason. I believe that there is a plan and a design in all of this, even when I can't understand it. And, the truth is I'm not as important in all of that as I think I am. And it's not all on me, that he is absolutely with us every single day, sees these kids, loves these kids more than I could ever possibly even know or understand. And so, from a big picture perspective, that is the way that I'm able to say, okay, well, I know that I'm doing what we're supposed to do for today. And so I'm just going to focus on that and trust that God has us, and that he'll do what he's going to do in this family according to his purposes, and that I can rest in that instead of constantly feeling like I have to struggle against the differences and the gaps.
Oh yeah,
practically. Oh, go ahead.
No,
I was going to say practically. Yeah. So, big picture, that is absolutely truth, on a practical level every single day. I would say the way that I allay the fears is by giving myself measurement. So I will look at repeatedly, probably more than I should, where we were a year ago or where we were 2 years ago. And even if it's not the progress that, the school system might dictate as being associated with the quote grade levels that my kids would be at, there's progress there. And what we are doing is working. Like I see, even though we're still struggling with reading, my son can pick up, a second grade book now and start to read it. And a few years ago, he was struggling to read the word the. I mean, it was like 6 months of making up songs and writing it in shaving cream on the shower door and trying to get to stick in his head. It's an abstract word. And so for a lot of kids, those types of words are very, very difficult to hang on to, especially when they're a sight word like that. But now he reads the word "the." So yeah, I mean, I think it does take a lot longer, and it takes a ton more patience and perseverance. And I think we have a lot of conversations in our homeschool about the importance of diligence, and how much that matters. If I'm going to reward my kids for anything, it's going to be because even though it was hard, they came back and they did it again. Or even though he got angry and tore up the worksheets or threw the pencil or whatever it is, he came back and we finished whatever it is that we were working on. That's going to be what I reward, because that is where I see the gain coming from. So that's been a huge help in terms of overcoming the fear. The other thing I will say, this is so, you could probably do a psychological study just on my progress throughout the past 8 years. And I'm sure it would be terrifying and interesting all at the same time. So, I mentioned that I went to school to be a special education teacher. I was trained to deal with children with a variety of different needs. But the absolute truth is that I went in for my first day of student teaching and said, there's no way I'm doing this. This classroom is not set up to be able to meet all of these kids' needs. And it hurts. Like, it hurt my heart that I couldn't do what I felt like those kids needed me to do because of the constraints of a special education environment and because of the constraints of being in the public school. And so I left and I went into adult learning and development for 10 years. And so I knew it wasn't the most effective setup. And yet that's the one that we're I shouldn't say constantly, but that we're frequently measured against when we're having conversations about ADHD or for my son with autism. And you know what I mean? So the other way that I get over that fear is I remember how it felt 20 years ago when I was in that classroom. And I think about my kids being in that type of classroom. And all of a sudden I feel a lot better about what we're doing. Yeah. Not because, there are wonderful education programs out there. There are wonderful teachers out there. But, I have 2 children versus in that classroom there were 10. So I can better focus on their individual needs and their individual differences and make accommodations accordingly, that it would just be impossible for a teacher with that many children with that many needs to be able to accommodate.
Oh yeah. And I know whenever I went to Daniel's last IEP meeting, they were talking about, because we're on a scholarship in our state. We get a scholarship with the Department of Education to help pay for his private speech therapist. He has dyspraxia
I love it.
and ADHD. And so because of that, we have to go in for IEP meetings.
Right.
So we went to his IEP meeting and they were talking about, if he was in school, he would have intervention services. And I was like, okay. I said, well, what exactly would you do? And they said, well, we pull him out twice a week for 30 minutes, one-on-one. And I'm like, he's getting that every day. And they're like, well, what other kind of, And they're like, well, what other kind of intervention services are you offering? And so I listed, I'm like, we're doing Elkonin boxes. I think that's the right name for it, to sound out, to make him more aware. I said, I listed like all of these different things we were doing with them. And the special education teacher was taking notes.
Right.
And like, then they asked me, they're like, well, what are these Bob books? Cause I was like, we're using Bob books, and I said, for his sight words, we're having him trace them. And then, I listed all these things and she said, well, those are the same things we would do with him. She said, you're doing a great job. And,
good.
I think that you sometimes, I don't want to say you need that reassurance, but like you said, I kind of needed that reminder that, what we're doing at home is, honestly what they would do in the public schools as far as intervention, only we're doing it every single day, one-on-one. And you don't get that in the public school system. You don't at all. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, it would be impossible for them to deliver that to every single child that needs it. Right. So yeah, definitely. And I think the reminder of that helps to allay some of that fear that I'm not doing enough, because the truth is that we're doing more than what our children would likely have access to.
Oh, absolutely. Daniel would get 2 20-minute sessions with his dyspraxia, maybe 3 a week. And we get 2 at home 45-minute sessions. And one of his, if he did have 3 sessions, one would be in a group. And we're getting 2 one-on-one 45-minute sessions and then one outside the home 30. And yeah, he would
And
get.
you're with him every
Yep.
time he's learning, every time, it comes up, you can incorporate that into a different lesson. He's getting constant reinforcement
Oh,
from
yeah.
you as well. It's not
Absolutely.
separate. It's just part of, like, he goes to these therapies, but then you're incorporating it into your days. Yeah. I mean, we do the same thing and are seeing the same results from it. It's just, again, it's hard to get out of your own head.
Yeah, and I think it's a fear that a lot of moms homeschooling special needs kids have, is that they're not providing this service. And I think that hopefully, we can remind them, and we need the reminder too, that they're absolutely in the best environment. So thank you, Shawna, for that.
My pleasure. That's why I'm here.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one is, what is one thing that you have learned as a homeschool mom?
I'm tempted to say never judge another homeschool mom. Because you just don't know what's going on with her children, with her life. But let me be a little more specific than that. I think that what the most important thing that I've learned over the course of the last 8 years is that individualized learning and learning styles matter more than I knew at the beginning. And again, I think this goes back to my training to be, a classroom teacher. I went into this thinking that, sure, every kid has a different learning style. Everybody's going to need, a little bit of a different approach. But the truth is that this is the way we present, and kids sort of need to come along with us in that when we present new learning, or, as we're moving through different learning expectations. And what I have found is that the truth is completely the opposite, at least in my home and, in the homes of many other families that I've come to know over the course of this journey. The truth is that we have the luxury of being able to individualize learning in such a way that it makes the best sense for our learner and their needs. That's one of the greatest gifts of homeschooling. And unfortunately, it took me a little while to not only grasp that, but implement it on a daily basis with my children. I went into this with, a very much like, this is the way I teach. And I've come out of it with this is the way they learn approach, which are two very different things, and they look very, very different on a daily basis. I think what's hard about that is that a lot of times learning in our home looks very different especially from the outside, than it would for your average 15-year-old or 12-year-old in any environment, homeschool or, classroom included. We do a ton of hands-on activities. We do a ton of movement-oriented activities. We spend a lot of time on strengths and special interests. We don't spend our days, remediating the gaps that my children have, for hours and hours at a time. We spend, an appropriate amount of time on it for the one lesson, and then we move on to the things that they're best at. And that is because, it's because of a variety of things. The first is that when I was in adult learning and development, I had the pleasure of working with the Gallup organization on information that they had gathered about the way that people learn, adults included, and also the way that kids learn. And what they found from this study that they did was that when you focus on remediating weaknesses, you typically see in children, you get a little bit, like a small percentage bump in those areas that are weak, and everything else sort of stays constant. But when you focus on the areas of strength, the things that the child is really, really good at, and do kind of not the minimum expectation, but just sort of a standard expectation associated with the weaknesses, all areas of learning exponentially grow. And it's because when you focus on strengths, you develop confidence. when you focus on strengths, your child learns how to learn, and then they can then apply that to the areas in which they are weak. And I am just starting to see that now in our school. I've kind of been doing it just on faith the last 4 or 5 years because nothing else was working. But, the truth is that because my son, my youngest that has the gaps in reading that we talked about, because he feels so confident with science in particular and anything related to animals and biology and sort of the habitats and geography associated with that and that kind of thing, he's more likely to pick up a book that is nonfiction about South America and the animals in South America and try and read it, and actually read it more than he would be able to do, just a basic primer about Jack and Jill. And
and that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, it's hard though, because it feels a little bit like jumping off a cliff. There's a lot of faith involved in just sort of leaning into who your children are, who God has made them to be, and, trusting that the rest is sort of going to come along instead of feeling like you have to scramble to be able to make up the differences. Now, with children that have sort of unique learning differences, you do need to spend time. It would be unfair for my child to never see any sort of learning associated with reading and phonics and spelling and that kind of thing, because he needs it. And he needs a very comprehensive and consistent approach to that. But the difference is that we don't spend our days there. We do it, and then we move into the things that are just a lot more natural for him. And that's where we do most of our homeschool.
Well, and I mean, taking that approach kind of bulks to society's view of education, but it really is what works best for the kids. And I think I've learned more. I've went that approach more the longer I've been homeschooling. I think.
Right.
I think you kind of learn more about how your kids learn, their styles, what they're interested in, and I think your homeschooling approach really changes the longer you've done it.
Yeah, that has definitely been true for me. Like I said, the first couple of years I sort of did it the way that I thought it should be done. And then slowly but surely kind of evolved into this, I'm going to do it the way that it works.
Absolutely, yeah.
Instead of, the way I think it should work or the way I think it should be.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, you talked a lot about learning styles and taking that approach for your kids. So what resource have you found could really help parents find their child's learning style and then their teaching style? I know I have one in mind, but I want to see if we have the same one.
I don't know that it is going to be the same one, because what has worked best for me is actually looking. I want to generalize this for any mom that's listening and not make it specific to my son's diagnoses. But the truth is that it's specific to my son's diagnoses. Yes. So for my oldest, because he is on the autism spectrum, he has a ton of really, really rigid special interests, things that he goes very, very, very deep into for a very long time. And, in the beginning, it felt like there was no rhyme or reason to them. It was like, he likes water treatment plants and like purification systems that you would put under the sink. And that evolved into aquariums and how you get the aquarium pH just right and filter it just right and that kind of thing. It's a small example, but we just took that and used it as his primary learning vehicle. So we incorporated in math, we incorporated in reading and that kind of thing. Most of that didn't come from an educational resource. It came from reading things like by Temple Grandin, who talked about how in her own life, what made a difference was having an interest in, the farm that she was on when she was 14, and how she came up with this way of calming down the cows. And that evolved into her life's work. For the most part, before she started traveling and talking about autism, she worked with and created some pretty brilliant, amazing approaches to how you humanely treat animals in a farm setting. It's been taking stuff like that and applying it. The one actually there's a couple. The books that I've read that have helped me kind of lean into that have been, there's a book that I always recommend that I love so much. I read it every single year, has been The Spark, by Christine Barnett. And she writes about her son, who is, even in the world of autism, is incredibly unique in that he was essentially almost nonverbal up until he was 4 years old.
Oh, wow.
And she made the decision to start working with him at home. And it turns out like he's going to win a Nobel Prize because he's such a genius and he's hilarious. I've seen him in person. He's hilarious. He's so funny.
Oh, I love that.
But she made the decision when he was 4 to pull him out of what everybody said was the only thing that you can do for a child with autism, which was, very repetitive, very stressful types of interventions to hopefully get him on track. And what she found is that the more she let him lean into his interests, the more he used those interests to start to communicate with the world. Now, my son is not nonverbal, but he definitely struggles with connecting with and communicating with us, to the point where there are times where, he is not able to speak. And the way that we're able to get around that is through his interests. Like he will always talk to you about something related to one of his special interests or something that he's working on. Right now he's building computers. So he's way into building computers, and it's a way to kind of bring him out of what's going on internally out into the world with us. For my youngest is sort of the opposite of his older brother. He needs to move. He needs to jump. He needs to be hands-on. He needs to create. He needs to have variation in short periods of time that he's focused. And so a lot of what I've used to understand and help with him is, first of all, Marianne Sunderland's Homeschooling with Dyslexia website is fantastic.
I love her.
Oh my gosh, she's amazing. And, she proofs in the pudding. She's been raising and educating 7 children. And I don't know, does she have 7 kids and 6 of them have dyslexia, or 8 kids and 7 of them? Anyway, she's got a lot of kids and a lot of dyslexia.
6 and 7. Yeah.
So she's got a lot of kids and a lot of dyslexia. And, I just find her teaching to be so practical for not only children that struggle with reading, but children that have some attention issues and executive function issues and that type of thing. And I love that it's from a mom's perspective, even though she is certainly an expert and has been trained in Norton Gillingham and that kind of thing. The way that she presents it is completely appropriate for what we do every day at home. I feel like I've learned so much more from her about teaching these kids than I ever did when I was in school. It's kind of like Marianne is my BA in in my education.
Yeah, I actually work for Marianne. I am her VA.
Oh, do you really? Oh, you do such a good job, Misty.
Well, I manage her Pinterest and do some graphics and stuff. But no, it was so funny though, because I started working for her, and I was working for her as I was in the process of having Daniel diagnosed with everything. And so I'm like, she was a godsend to me.
I'm sure.
Because I would have never, Daniel's not been diagnosed with dyslexia. So we think he has it, but he's not been officially diagnosed. And so I would have just assumed her whole website was just dyslexia and I couldn't gain anything else from it. And then I started diving into it, working for her. And I'm like, she was a godsend to me. Yeah, it is amazing.
And I feel like everything that I've learned from her has so much less to do with reading and so much more to do with how to respond to your child where they are, and yet, have some expectations for how we're going to progress and what the day is going to look like. And that has been practical for me, independent of reading, for sure, for both of my children, regardless of their diagnosis. I mean, my oldest was actually hyperlexic, so he read when he was 2.5. He's totally the opposite of his brother. And yet I've learned things from her and from her site that I apply with him every day. So I can't recommend her enough. I love that you work for her. That's so fun. We'll tell her I said hi.
Yeah.
Next time you talk to her.
And I found the same thing though from your site, like doing Pinterest and stuff with you and just the ADHD resources. And you have an amazing wealth of information as well that you can offer the special needs community. And I think God puts people in our lives, whether it be through work or through online businesses or things like that, to really mold us and help us on our homeschool journey. And so I'm thankful for both of you guys. So
Thank
there you go.
you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
I appreciate that.
So, so my my recommendation for the resource to help parents with learning styles was going to be the book from Kathy Duffy.
Yes.
That's what
I
I
just
use.
got that. I just got
Yes.
that book. I didn't even know
Yeah.
she had that book. I just found out like
Yeah.
2 weeks ago. That's so funny that you brought it up. It just
Mhm.
arrived on Amazon. I bought it used, so it took a little while to get here, but it's here. I can't wait to read it now that you're recommending it.
Yeah. It was a wonderful resource for me when I first started homeschooling because my girls learn completely different from how I
Mm-hmm.
teach. And
Mm-hmm.
so it really helped me see how they learn and how to mold my homeschool to fit their needs, but yet also still allow me to kind of teach them to my teaching style.
Right. Right.
But it is a wonderful book. But yeah, you had so many other amazing resources, and you'll have to send me the links or the names. I tried to write them down to the
I
books
will.
you recommend,
I
and
will.
then I'll put them in the show notes too.
You bet. The other one I'm going to put on that list as well for you is the
Hmm.
Out of Sync Child has at play. I'll send it to you, but that's a really, really good one for kind of that movement child, the child that needs to move and learn at the same
Hmm.
time. It's by the same gal that wrote The Out of Sync Child, but this is much more like hands-on practical stuff. And I've used that book. I mean, that book is like torn up in our house because it's a part of how we do every single thing. So I will send that to you as well, because that's one I would recommend just for someone who needs an idea for how, like, I know this child needs to move, but I also need him to do math. And so that's a great one for helping you kind of incorporate the two in.
Oh yeah, we got an exercise ball for him, and he loves sitting on it and moving. But then I'm like, he moves so much. I'm like, one of these days he's gonna fall off, bust his chin. We're gonna end up back in the emergency room with glue on his chin
Yep.
again because he has to move all the time. And
Yeah.
I say I say that God has a sense of humor because one of my friends' boys that she adopted was so much like Daniel at that age. And I would tell her, I'm like, I could not have a kid like that. Like, he'd be amazing with
Famous
him,
last words.
but I'm like, I could not homeschool him because I would keep him
Right.
sometimes. And then I have him on steroids with Daniel. So,
Right.
yeah, God gives
Yep.
us. Yeah,
Absolutely. It's so
fun.
funny. Famous last words too. I would never. There's no way.
Oh yeah. And I swear I thought ADHD was a
Yep.
parenting mishap too. I really did.
Yep.
I
Mm-hmm.
really did. The kind that Daniel has, I mean,
Sure.
just it's been a journey. It's been a journey.
It's, here's the thing. It's so hard because we do live in a culture
Mhm.
that tends to look for blame when it comes
Mhm.
to differences, right? It's
Mhm.
very common across every single diagnosis that my kids have. There's an element of it that someone at some point along the way has said was probably due to my parenting, or
Mhm.
me spoiling them, or not doing this, or I should have done this, that type of thing. But the more research, this is another way to overcome the fear part, I will say that. The more and more research that comes out about these diagnoses that seem to be suddenly exploding for one reason or another, the more they show that there are distinct differences in brain function. When they
Mhm.
do a brain scan of children like ours, their brains are just wired differently. And there are things about that make them amazing in some
Mhm.
areas. And there are things about that look like, bad parenting for the person that chooses to go that route and wants to judge. I always tell my husband, I can't wait for, 20 years from now, 25 years from now, to see what we think about these things, because I think it's changed a lot with autism. It's still not where it needs to be, in terms of an overall understanding of what it's like, and the vast spectrum that exists in terms of what children who have an autism diagnosis can do, and what their struggles are. I think that's going to be kind of I think it will be like that as well for ADHD and some of the mental health stuff that my youngest deals with. I can't wait to see what we think about it later. Once we have more information and we're a little bit more informed, my hope and my prayer is that there will be just a lot more of an awareness and understanding of some of these things as just a function of what happens in the body, instead of so much shame and so much judgment associated with them for moms in particular.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I know I read, after my oldest was diagnosed, I read the book Gift. I think it was called Gift of ADHD, The Gift of ADHD. And it really helped me look at these differences as gifts, as personality traits that God can take and God can use and really make a difference. And I think that a lot of times in the special needs community, we don't look at that. We look at their differences as hindrances. We look at them as, like that poor child or things like that, instead of taking those traits and thinking of what kind of gift they can give us, and how God can use those differences for his glory. Right. And my mind has just changed so much over it through the years. And so I'm still a work in progress too.
Yeah, I think we all are. And I think part of that we always will be. I think that's true for parents of children that don't struggle with these types of things too. It's easy to see differences as flaws.
That's the word I was looking for,
yeah. And the truth is that the more you work with a child that has differences, the more you see and uncover some pretty amazing traits and strengths. And even the moms, I just want to say for the mom out there that is really struggling to see that, because there are children that have some very significant differences and disabilities. My guess is that in your quietest hours with your child, it's still there. There's still that presence and that love and that connection that exists beyond anything that anyone else is telling you about your child. And I think the more we can lean into that, the more we can celebrate the child that we've been given, no matter how difficult it is, sometimes on a daily basis, the easier life is. I think the more we surrender to what God's plan is, even when it's hard, the better and more joyful our journey becomes when we're operating as moms and caregivers and teachers and all the things that we do on a daily basis.
Oh yeah. Well, we went off on a special needs tangent there, didn't we? I love it.
We did. Sorry, it was bound to happen if you had me on.
Yeah, it's totally. No, I need it though. I love it. So you're just such an encourager. Okay, so the last question is, how do you find joy in your homeschool day? And I love that right here, I'm writing this down, celebrate the child God has given us, because that could be a little meme. I'm going to make a meme out of that.
Right? Go for it. Yeah. I love it. So there's a couple ways that, even on the toughest days, I feel like I'm able to find joy. I will say this is sort of a caveat. There are days where I have to look for it. It's not, we don't just wake up every day and say, oh my goodness, this child is fearfully and wonderfully made, and look at all these amazing gifts associated with these differences. It's not like that on a regular basis. No. So it does require some intentionality on days when it's just a struggle. So here, this is super practical and maybe even a little bit dumb, but the way that I can always sort of get us back on track and make just add a little bit of joy in my own heart and hopefully in my children's is we get in the car and we listen to audiobooks and we drive around and maybe get hot chocolate in the Starbucks drive-through or stop for some ice cream and just get out of our own space and our own heads, I think is is good. My children are older, and so they're kind of all over the place when we're home and when we're learning. And there's something about just sort of shutting off the world in our little minivan and, driving around that helps refocus us. And some of my sweetest moments come from, being on the road and having my youngest, talk about the book that we're listening to, or having my oldest sort of tell my youngest something he didn't know about the book. And I don't know, there's just, maybe it's because no one's making eye contact, and I have boys with social differences, and neither of them like making eye contact, but there's something beautiful about our time together spent doing that. I know when they're older, I'm going to look back and miss those drives and miss, just having that connection. It sounds silly, but it's true.
No, it's not silly at all.
The other thing that I will say that helps bring me joy in all of this is carving out time to spend one-on-one with them in terms of their interests. So, for my oldest, there are times where my husband will come home at night and I'll go in with him, and he just basically will walk me through everything that he's been interested in doing for the day associated with his special interest. So again, right now it's building computers. And so I will sit there and he will light up and share with me, why this motherboard connect. I have no idea what he's talking about. Let me just be clear. None whatsoever. But there is an element of joy in just seeing him happy, and engaged and talking and excited. For my youngest, it's getting him outside and letting him run and jump and do all the things he loves to do, and sit on the trampoline with him. And he wants to, he wants to connect, and the way that he connects is through movement and play together. And being able to do that with him, again, reminds me, and, having those little sweet moments with each of them one-on-one helps ground me in how much joy there is in this homeschooling thing we're all doing. So those are my two. Get in the car and try and spend some time one-on-one where you can just kind of be people together, instead of, a teacher with two kids, or a homeschooling mom with kids trying to get all these things done throughout the course of the day.
Yeah, to just be able to just be mom for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
That makes total sense. Yeah, that makes total sense. I love that. Okay, well, Shawna, thank you so much. This has been like a wonderful experience getting to talk to you and getting to know you better. So can you tell everybody where they can find all things Shawna, your social media, where they like to connect with you, all of that fun stuff?
Definitely. So again, my blog is nottheformerthings.com. Everything is there. If you don't remember anything else of what I say, you can find me there. I am on Facebook, and we actually have a brilliant page because of the community that's there. I pride myself on the fact that that these gals and guys, there are some guys there too, I don't want to leave them out, but primarily moms that are there, seek to encourage and support anyone that's coming that has a need or a question or a concern. And thankfully, I feel like it's just God's grace. We don't have a lot of that really negative things that can come up on Facebook. As much as I think Facebook gets a bad rap sometimes, and it deserves it sometimes, I will say that. I have found nothing but connection and education and a ton of grace in the special needs community there. And so you can find me at Not the Former Things on Facebook as well. And then I'm on Instagram, and I use Instagram solely for showing pictures of all the random stuff that we do. So if you look at our page, that Instagram account shows what I was talking about, how our learning looks totally different than anyone else's. And so I've used that as a way for a mom to just feel a little bit better. She's having a tough day. She can go and look and see, oh, look, That was school for them today. All right. Well, that's pretty. I did more than that. I'm doing well.
Hey, we all need that sometimes in a
That's
in a
the
Pinterest
truth.
perfect world. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Well, and Misty, because you've been helping me,
Mm-hmm.
I am on Pinterest now, and I'm focused primarily on using that to provide resources for hands-on learning, for learning differences, for mom support, that type of thing. So those would be the three social media places to find me. And then, of course, the blog.
Okay, well, that is awesome. I will link back to all of this in the show notes. And Shawna, thank you so much for what you are doing, just for all the special needs moms out there. You are just a breath of fresh air and just such an encouragement. And I hope that if you are listening to this and you are a special needs mom, just please make sure you share this with your friends. And you can get something out of it even if you don't have special needs. But I know that there's so many out there that need that encouragement. And
Right.
so I hope that this will reach many of those moms and that they will check you out and just be encouraged by you. So thank you so much for being with me today.
100% my pleasure. Thank you so much, Misty.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Guys, what did you think of Shawna? I still just am just in awe of all that we talked about, and just, like I said, the wealth of information that she is and the encouragement that she is to moms who are homeschooling special needs. The biggest thing that stood out to me about this interview with Shawna, and one of the things that I have continued to think about since she and I recorded this interview, is that God gave me these kids and he had a plan and design for them, even when I don't understand it. And I just think that is something just so strong to just hold on to, whether you homeschool kids with special needs or not. Each of our kids, God has a plan for them and he has a purpose for their lives. And we may not understand their quirks. We may not understand why they have certain special needs or why they struggle with things, but he does. And this was all part of his design. And that is just something that I have held on to since I spoke with her. And I hope it is a encouraging takeaway for you this day, and that you will hold on to that as you homeschool these kids. Like I said, even if they do have quirks, even if there are things about them and days of homeschooling that are difficult, God has a plan and a purpose for their lives, and we are just here to mold them and raise them and to care for them and to help them become the best of whatever God has in store for them. So I encourage you to go and check out Shawna's blog, nottheformerthings.com, and just follow her and just thank her for this episode. So if you have any questions or concerns or things that you would like to discuss with me about homeschooling, maybe you're not sure if you can homeschool a child with special needs, maybe you have a child like my Daniel who has ADHD and you would just like to get some tips and ideas, I do have a couple blog posts about homeschooling with ADHD, and I will link to those in the comments. But I also offer homeschool consultation services. So these services, we can sit together and, not actually physically together, but in the online world, and discuss homeschool curriculum and things that you can do in your homeschool to help your child learn better in their environment. We can talk about curriculums that may fit their learning style and your teaching style. And we can just chat about homeschooling, and it is a one-on-one service that you can't get from a blog post or even a podcast. And I would love to chat with you. So I will also leave a link to the homeschool consultation services in the show notes if you are interested. So that is it for episode 10 of the Joyfully Homeschooling podcast. Now head out and have a more joyful homeschool.